Hi everyone, and welcome to today's home games in this sweltering day. I hope you're managing to cope in the heat. I'm delighted to be joined by the one and only Robert Reid. Hi Rob, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Natalie. I'm absolutely fine.
Good. Lovely to have you with us. So we've already had some comments about deciphering your Glaswegian accent, which I'm sure, as the audience can imagine, has been met with a very polite response.
Well, I'd just like to say to Nick Lincoln, I've actually only got one thing to say to Nick Lincoln, but we'll go that to a close. The supply of hot sauce could be discontinued now. That's all I can say.
That's an in-joke for the people who are watching.
Absolutely.
Right, so there's a couple of things for me to run through before we kind of get into it, and I know a lot of people have got popcorn and egg sarnies and all kinds of things and water and aircon at the ready, so this should be a good one, so looking forward to it. I think a lot of people know the drill on this by now, but if you don't or need reminding, there is a chat down the side where you can kind of put your questions and your comments to Rob, or if you want to steer the conversation in a particular way. And there's also the ask a question button, which is down below, and that will make sure that it kind of gives me a little ping and I can take the questions there as well. So we're going to kind of get into all things PFS and professional bodies and, you know, challenges for the advice industry and all of that. But the only thing that I needed to flag just before we do all of that stuff is that although we are always asking you for things, we are always appreciative of you doing them. And there is a little kind of button down below just for you to kind of take part in our latest platform ratings. And that's really helpful for us because that makes sure that we get as wide and as representative views as possible. So if you could kind of do that once this chat is done, that would be very helpful. So I think that's all my housekeeping. There's only one more thing that I need to do, which is this kind of sort of technical help link. So if you do have problems or kind of buffering issues or anything like that, I think this should do the trick, but sometimes it doesn't. But give it a go, and hopefully that should kind of see you right. So I think that's about it from me, Rob. So I think we'll kind of launch into why everybody's here. I mean, obviously the main kind of reason and kind of main focus for the chat today is all around kind of what's happening with PFS, which won't have escaped anybody's attention if they've been kind of reading kind of trade press headlines and things. And there's kind of been a few things going on. So there's been obviously the main kind of concern, I guess, to put it mildly, is around the attempts to deregister the PFS from the CII. There's also been kind of pushback around poor looking certificates, if we can kind of call it that, the lack of the CEO following Keith Richards' departure. I think I can go on, but there's kind of general kind of undercurrent and feeling of PFS members generally being undervalued. So I think everybody's kind of up to speed, but some people might not be. So if you could kind of briefly set out what's the kind of situation and kind of the current position thus far, and then perhaps maybe a little starter for 10 on what you think might have gone wrong.
Okay, well, I think current position wise, I think we're now find ourselves having to debate what the future is for PFS. Is PFS the right vehicle for what we need going forward? Because I think there's a great danger that there's this habit people have sometimes of just doing something because they've always done it. And I think we've got to recognize that the sector's changed a lot. And it's got a lot of fairly major challenges, which I'd like to pick up a wee bit later. So it's not just about exams. It's not just about letters after your name. It's not just about your SPS. It's far bigger than that. And you also ask, where did it go wrong? Well, I think where it went wrong was the CII management, I think, lost the fact that it is a member body. Yeah. It's not a PLC. It's not a corporate trading company. It's a member body. And really, you really have to run it in quite a different way if you're going to keep everybody on board, and people start to feel neglected if you don't do that. And I think there is a sort of atmosphere of neglect, which extends not just to PFS, because across the CII members as well. Yeah? And there is that sort of emotional connection that we have with it. I mean, the team I've been working in, which includes both past presidents and also some of the newer people coming into the market that are making the mark, like Arthur Walker. We've got people who are emotionally invested in what they've done, because we've all spent a lot of our own time, whether that was going back to days of SOFA, getting that off the ground, whether it was the negotiations with PFS on when we bring in the LIA, all those kind of things. So we all spent a lot of personal time with a very clear view of where we wanted to be. And that clear strategy was set when we signed the deal with LIA. And that was very important because it was a member organization and it was one member, one vote. CII had a connection with it, but it wasn't at any time deemed any form of subsidiary. That's why it was set up limited by guarantee to protect all the members, so there wasn't any risk for them, or the risk was minimized, basically I think to £1 each. But I think where it's gone wrong is it's this lack of focus on core activities by CII. I think we've seen that recently in the debacle in the examinations, where investment in taking more and more exams online was sort of halted a few years ago. And now with the benefit of hindsight and what's happened with COVID, that was obviously a fairly bad move and has been, if you like, magnified by the COVID and the pandemic. So we have a situation where we've got an organization that I think has lost its focus, whereas at the same time, sitting to one side of that, you have the PFS, who's profitable, who's well organized, and who's making good representation to FCA, HMT, etc. And if you fold PFS into the CII, that will change things dramatically. So from where I'm standing, I think we have to have a very honest debate about what's happened. I think there's a lot of obfuscation on things like financial numbers and everything else, and it's hard to get a straightforward answer as to what exactly has been going on. And I think that's something we've got to be mindful of. Someone said to me the other day, what happens if we do nothing? And I said to them, well, I think you'd be looking at if the CII was to be able to go ahead and sort of merge PFS into what would effectively become a society, that would be the end of representation. I don't think you'd hear much being said. I don't think there'd be much of a voice. I don't think you'd have any real influence in the sector overall. And I think that would be a very big backward step. And that's why we principally got involved.
Yeah. I mean, I think Gary Hale kind of is echoing that in terms of that whole emotive piece. And it is like you say, isn't it? A lot of good people have kind of given up their time and their effort and their resources to kind of try and take forward the profession. And I guess when you kind of have a parent company that is seemingly at odds with that, that's where you get the conflict, isn't it? So I think you talked about it a little bit there, but I mean, why did you think it was up to you and the past PFS presidents to bring this fight beyond that kind of high level stuff that you just set out there?
I think you have to look at the fact that you do need a very well organized professional body going forward. If you're going to get the kind of messages you need to get into the regulators and others. I mean, bear in mind at the moment, if we forget exams for a little bit of time, we've got the problem of PI at the moment. Yeah, I've stopped calling it PI. I now call it pay to play, which is what it really is. I mean, let's cut all the nonsense. We know that it's rarely going to pay out for most people, especially in the DB side. And so we're paying this enormous amount of money just to trade. So it's almost like a membership fee. So that needs colossal revisal. And I think we have to be really go into something which is far more long-term than just some kind of sticking plaster. The same thing with FSCS. There's some rumor that the FCA is going to do something together with capital adequacy, but capital adequacy doesn't work either. And from that point of view, we need to make sure that if we're going to fix anything in this sector, we do it in such a way that we don't forget one of the holes in the bucket. Yeah. So we get a variety of problems with, making this whole sector work properly. And if we ignore the fact that we do need to have some form of formalized due diligence in the market that firms have to be subjected to, and I mean proper type of due diligence. And we've already seen the signs that the insurers are concerned with legal in general. We're in the press the other week where they were going out demanding to have interviews with IFAs. And that's the thin end of the wedge. And that's the reaction from the providers looking at what's happened with the Carey case, where the liability has extended. And if you like, the providers now realize they're a bit like manufacturers of refrigerators. They can't walk away at the end. They've got this product liability that sits with them and continues to sit. So I think we have to be grown up about what we put together in the marketplace. I think FOSS has to be pushed onto a legal basis sooner rather than later. It's one of the reasons it's got a backlog, because there's too much sort of free format. And I think the FCA has actually shown a bit of light down the end of the tunnel, because the new chair clearly sees that things haven't worked. They've been focusing in the wrong areas, and that they have to actually get themselves sorted out, because people at Treasury Select Committee, etc., are starting to lose patience with how things are being done. So I think there's a lot of other things going on, and I think within all of that, you do need a strong professional body. And if you've got a professional body that's subsumed, that is starved of resources, starved of control, there's no way they're going to be able to represent you properly.
Yeah.
You actually need something that has the financial strength to do it.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you covered a lot of ground there in quite a short space of time, so we'll dig into some of that a little bit later on.
Right. Yeah.
But in terms of and I can see that there's a couple of questions that have come in from Anthony and from Gary, so I'll come to those in a second as well. But just to sort of stay with the PFS for a second, I mean, you talked about the need there for a strong professional body and why you need it to kind of stand up and sort of do what it does. But do you think that's what we have just now in the PFS, and do you think that is still fit for purpose?
I think we've got the bones of what we need. I think we have to turn up the volume in certain areas quite markedly. I think we probably would need to look structurally at how it actually operates, and having the right segmentation between the professional standards part and the lobbying, etc., and also the commerciality that has to be in the organization to make it work and make it effective. So I think there's some structural change needs to happen. So this is no small project. This isn't like a sort of DIY thing for the weekend. This is something that if we come to a point where either we can't resolve things with the CII, or the CII don't want to get involved in that discussion, or alternatively, the CII say, okay, put your proposals together for putting something that would work for the two of us, which would, if you like, be the better of the options. That's going to take a lot of time. It's not going to happen in 5 minutes. You're going to need to staff that up, etc. Because Gary Hale and the rest of the guys, Brian Steeples, Carol, Sharon, Nick, and Alistair, etc., we're all doing it in our own time. And to do this effectively, you are going to have to say, this is going to cost money to actually do it, change it, and get it into the shape we want, so that the professional body is then influencing how things go forward. And, I'm just picking up some of the comments going down the side at the moment. I mean, it's the first time someone's called me polite, so I'd like to thank Elliot Guthrie for that. My late mother would be very impressed. But yeah, the exams are a debacle, and you've got to take that in the chin if you're the institute. You've got to say, we haven't done well. We need to improve these things. I also have this pathological hatred of everything being memorized. You don't memorize. If you're sitting checking a report, writing a report, talking to a client, it's instinctive. You'll put your hand out and pull across your tax tables, or you'll flip onto Google and just double check something while you're talking. That's normal.
Yeah.
So then to have to sort of try and get all this knowledge into your head from the exam, etc., is not a good thing. You actually need to go. Someone just said,
putting you off.
yeah, very good. There we go. Yes, yes. Well, that's fair. Nick saying that I'm slightly more handsome when I'm out of focus. But then that's the man who is a face for radio. Anyway,
now.
I'll bash him when I can. But no, seriously, I think the exams, you need to sort of start from the beginning again and think, is open book a good alternative? It's not necessarily easier. I mean, I've sat open book exams, and they're far longer in time because of their very nature. But we have to have a good adult conversation about that to get those kind of things sorted. But all those things take resource, they all take people, and that's something we've got to realize. So it's not like a light switch. You're not going to fix something overnight.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I'm going to take some of these questions now that are coming in. So thank you for those. So Gary asked a couple, so I'll ask them together and then I'll kind of bundle them in with some that I had as well. So Gary is kind of asking about what you see as your ideal outcome for the PFS from all of this. I mean, we've had the attempts to deregister, we've had the kind of, lodging of the protest votes at the AGM. So I guess it's the what next really. And then he kind of goes on to ask about your views on a proper kind of merger of the CII and PFS. So Chartered Institute for Insurance and Financial Planning, for example. And I guess when we've kind of talked about this before as well, there is just this kind of issue of what happens next. You kind of, the protest has been lodged, but it feels like relations are not quite irreparable, but it's not good, is it? So it's sort of like, what next, and what would you like to kind of see happen as a result of everybody kind of putting up their head above the parapet and kind of saying they're not happy with the way things are being run just now?
Okay, can I take your second question first? Okay.
Yeah.
So merger of CII and PFS. I think the problem in that one is the cohorts from general insurance and from financial services are so different, yeah? And you would run the problem there that we would be the smaller grouping in that situation. So plus the fact the time that would take and the money it would take, yeah? Having worked on a merger before, it is silly money that has to be spent to get it all done. And so you've got to be very sure that that definitely is a good idea. So I'm not dismissing it completely, but I think it's unlikely to be the most economic or the one that would drive forward what you really want. Because any merger, you've got to decide who's in charge. Yeah. Many people would say there's no such thing as a merger, it's a takeover. But picking up on the first part, what would be the best outcome? I think the best outcome, for me, this is like deja vu. Yeah. Years ago, when SOFA was around, we were fighting to try and get the then CEO of the CII to put forward an application for chartered financial planning. And we had terrible arguments over this. And in the end, I remember, been taken out for dinner and asked by the president of the CII at the time, what did I want to make me happy? And I said, I wanted our financial independence, I wanted a chartered title, and I wanted us to be respected as something which is actually, still is, the most profitable part of the Institute. Yeah. And I think that's where we've got to get to. I think you could build a joint venture between the two parts. And I think you would want a joint venture between the two parts. You want the ability for people to have their chartered titles. You want the ability to influence the content of exams going forward. And the CII want the intellectual input to build those exams. So I think there's an actual connection there. It's how you actually bring that all about is the important part. But I think the pace of change and the things that have to change in our sector are such that we have to go on with it at a reasonable pace. We can't go too slow. So time is of the essence. And the next thing we'll be moving into is building what we see as a reasonable vision, and we'll do that through consultation, discussion, and building from there. So we know that we actually represent what people are looking for.
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes to Gary's point as well around sort of taking this opportunity for a reset and creating I think he puts it quite nicely, shape a proper future and fair relationship for members, the profession and the public. So I think everybody would kind of agree with those sentiments. And then Andy Arthur, who I think you know from way back when, he has a question around this probably isn't as easy as it seems, but what is stopping PFS members going it alone and kind of harking back to the sofa days?
I suppose there's two things that you've got to be sensitive to there. People would immediately say, well, what happens to my statement of professional standing? Yeah. And the reality to that is that you could set up a new body and you could get that permission from the FCA. Okay. So that's not necessarily a barrier. The one that you're looking at is if people want to hold on to their post-nominal letters, their chartered or their AFPS or FFPS, then it's a question of what are they going to have to pay to hold on to those, because people obviously have resistance to paying double fees. And at the moment, PFS members pay more than CII members anyway. So there's already a differential. Not sure everybody knows that, but there is a differential. Don't ask me what it's for, because I can't honestly remember. But I think what you'd have to do is do some kind of apportionment that actually bridged a period and got you up and running and flowing. But there's no reason to stop rebuilding something completely separate. Because the one thing that we're very clear on, we've no intention of building our own exams.
Yeah.
It's the last thing we ever thought about. We dismissed that very early on. In fact, in Europe, European Financial Planning Association, which I was involved in putting together, PFS is a member of EFPA, which is why people have extra letters after their name, European Financial Plan. If you subsumed the PFS into CII, you would lose that. You would lose it because European law is such that they do not like examining bodies being member bodies. They see it as a conflict of interest. So that's another part. But yeah, it's a fair question, and I think what we were saying is we've got to look at all options, and we've got to be pragmatic, sensible, but we've also got to make people comfortable that it's going in the right direction.
Yeah. So a standalone PFS isn't off the table then?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay. And then just kind of, I suppose, to round things off, I mean, Gary asks a kind of follow-up question in terms of, spearheading all the kind of good stuff that you're talking about. How do you do that? Does it have to be the case that you have to appoint a new CEO? He asked about a new CII CEO, but I guess, we haven't got the PFS CEO role either now, have we? So I don't know what you want to say about that.
What I'd say about that is that we've already discussed that in our small group as to the pressures that would hit us as the thing builds momentum, because that's really important. Because the last thing you want to do is get caught by everything that's happening and not being able to cope with it, yeah, because that's a disaster. So we've already come up with a sort of short list of people for key elements of a project build, be that a separate body or be that an integration or some kind of JV. So I've already identified, we've spoken to people who are interested in helping. And from that point of view, I think I'd probably want that bill, and then you would think, what kind of CEO really fits here? Yeah.
Okay. Because
until you've actually got the shape right, yeah, do you want someone who's more operationally sound? Do you want someone who is image? Or do you bring the image back and push it back to the president of the PFS? Do you make it more practice-based, mm-hmm. which is probably where my brain would go first. But I think it's almost like having a startup. When people build startups, the smart ones know when to get out of it and put someone else in to run. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think if you went to CEO too fast, you end up running you no sooner have agreed what you're going to do than they would want to run their own strategic review, etc., and that just everything goes into treacle, you know.
Yeah.
So I would say we would have
design process first, and then
build.
Yeah.
Temporary management team, and then move from there.
Okay, that's all very interesting. And I haven't forgotten Anthony's question, but I am going to come back to it a little bit later. Because it's maybe more of a positive one to kind of ask towards the end. But so I know that earlier you talked about, I think your analogy was, a bucket with many holes, and beyond all of this PFS noise and concern, and for want of a better word, there are some things that actually, as an advice profession and financial planners, that need to be tackled like pretty urgently if the profession is going to kind of be future-proof, if you like. And I think you rattled off all of them earlier, PII, FSCS, FOS, the whole alphabet regulatory soup. So, I mean, is there any one among those that you want to tackle just now or get views on in terms of the way forward? Because those are all pretty big holes in the bucket.
Well, if we put them into groups, I mean, FOS, FSCS, what was the other one of those?
PI.
Yeah, hang on. Due diligence, PI. Due diligence, PI sit together, really, at the end of the day. I don't think capital adequacy rules as they currently stand are particularly effective. Many, many years ago, I remember writing a letter to the press saying that, capital adequacy didn't equate to good culture or good behavior. Just meant you go on the bank. And I think we've got to look at how we actually cover things that go wrong. I'm encouraged to look at things that seem to work. I mean, the ABTA scheme seems to work, when somebody goes down, or ATOL, or whatever, any of the bonding schemes you're looking at, if they're properly constructed, I think can work. And the providers have a vested interest in this working out. I think there's ways to do it in a better way. I think the problem with PI is intrinsic in the fact that, it's the way it works is that you can have someone who takes £50,000 in premium off you, and for something that you gave advice on in that particular year, then falls on a different insurer later on. So it's very profitable to the PI companies at the moment because of the level of premiums. And if they're lucky and not too many people bang a claim in that period, then they can move on. But I think the other part is I think we have a lot of peripheral players in the marketplace at the moment who contribute to the risk but don't contribute to the pot. And I mean by that the software houses that take part in the market, the people who are where their software is there to drive forward fund sales and things like that. So they are taking part in the process, but they pay no regulatory fee, and therefore there's no comeback if something goes wrong. And there's quite an extensive list. I think we also have to look at the press position, and the press exemption was done way back, 1986? Yeah.
Okay.
That was when it was devised. Now, if you think how the media has changed in that period, and you look at the rise of influencers in the marketplace, not just for what clothes you wear, but for what you should be investing in.
Those kind of trader influencer types.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you've got people thinking that, that is actually them getting some kind of guidance advice when it clearly isn't. And I think that pollutes the market. And that's part of the things that we end up picking up. We really need to get that grasped, get it sorted, and push forward on it so that we have something there. I'm very intrigued by Anthony Morrow's comment here, madness.
I think that was a while ago. I can't remember what that was in relation to.
I don't know.
But just generally, probably the whole, conversation up to now.
But the press thing, I mean, we've been tracking the press. A few of us have been tracking the press over the last 6 months. Yeah, watching the kind of advice that's being given in the press on quite technical issues.
You mean like in the kind of money pages as well as the kind of influencer space?
So we've looked at that, we've looked at the influencer space, easy for me to say, and they are all receiving monetary payments for who they're plugging. Yeah. Now, I don't see how that takes them out of the regulatory gambit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think obviously going to take a courageous chancellor, but someone needs to look at that area, because people are increasingly taking their advice from those sources, thinking advice, and similar to execution only, not realizing that no one's actually standing behind it.
Yeah.
As we've seen with
the debate that's kind of happening right now around like treating Facebook as publishers, and like them being subject to different rules than kind of the paper press. So I guess it's that kind of thing. So it would be a brave person to kind of tackle that and try and police it, I guess. And I might just fall into that cap, kind of doing content and working for a consultancy. So I'm not sure I'm kind of vouching for it, but at the same time, I can definitely see that rise of the influencer and TikTok, as Alan mentions, and all of that kind of thing, and the kind of misinformation there that's couched as kind of tips, which is not helpful at all in terms of people who don't really have that much financial expertise. I think that is something that definitely needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
Right. Well, let me bring Anthony Morrow back in from when he kind of first posted his question, and he asked right at the top of this chat around kind of. I think he wants to kind of have a perhaps more positive discussion around what you would consider the biggest initiative and development in the advice sector since you've started, and sort of as a kind of follow-up to that, what would excite you most about the direction of the industry if you were kind of starting over?
I suppose the two things I would point to that I'm most proud of comment industry was when SOFA we brought in the pro bono project with CAB, and obviously getting the charter title was very important, because we wanted to encourage youngsters to look at this as something they should be considering as a profession. Yeah? So those two things are really important. I think going forward, the big thing for me is that we have to make it easier for the public to actually see what we're actually providing for them and understanding what we're really delivering. Yeah. I look at it at the moment, and if you get to do a review for somebody, I looked at one recently, and it was about 80 pages long, all the various disclosure documents, etc. Now that isn't communication, that just drives people not to engage. Yeah. Years ago in money marketing, I suggested that instead of getting files compliance checked, we should all take them to a weighbridge, and it would be £10 in weight if it was just an ISA, but it would be £26 if it was a personal pension. Unfortunately, there were people who phoned up and asked where the weighbridges were. The FCA were impressed. But the point was that we were sort of losing the plot a little bit. It is, how do you engage more people into planning earlier? How do you engage better with the younger generations? Because they are the ones who are going to have the biggest challenge going forward. Yeah. So how do you get it into a format where it works? And I mean, you look at things like simplified advice. I've been involved in probably about 5 of those projects that went nowhere because no one had the courage to say, well, let's design it in such a way that we can do it without having to keep all these records and everything else, because people know where they are. And that all flows from simple titles. Yeah. So if you say to someone, oh, you're execution only, what does that mean to the average person?
Sure.
That means they probably think they're going to get handed a cigarette any moment and shot. But it's meaningless, and that's the part we've got to deal with. We've got to actually get ourselves to the point where people actually think it's smart and it's cool to have themselves organized. And I think some of the work that people at Anthony are doing in the sort of employee benefits side is a good place to start. But it's still challenging because of the number of rules that are there. And I think we've if we do get all this tidied up, and I'm very hopeful that we will, that one of the representations we start to make is to try and look at the whole process that we're working at the moment. Because it seems to me that if we painted the process in two colors, the stuff that we have to do for regulation and the stuff that actually gives the client confidence and happiness and everything that they need from what's built for them, we'd run out of paint for the regulation side pretty fast.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be painting much. So I think we'll get the balance is totally tilted away. I hope that's what Anthony was looking at, because I think one, we have to get it to a point where people will automatically come in to work in this industry because they'll be proud to do what they're doing. Yeah. And the biggest challenge we have, I think, going forward is to help people build their engagement skills, build their ability to sort of paint pictures, to explain to people how something works, etc.
So that's on the planners, you mean, like to kind of do more awareness building and engagement and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think we have to get it to a point where it's a given that people go in and they have a will, and it's a given that they have a power of attorney. And to do that, you've really got to explain to what it's like if they don't, you know. So sometimes we're coming in at the wrong position, and I think we're partially coming in at the wrong position because we're so conscious of trying to make reports something that's compliant rather than something that's quality educationally and also from a communicative basis. Someone can pick it up and read it, you know, and think, know what that's about, understand it. That's what I've always wanted us to get towards. And I think that will take time for us to do it, because I think there's still quite a few people in the industry that don't want to do that, you know. That's a lovely one.
Yeah, so I think Matthew was saying that there's too much rubbish in our profession, and agrees with you there. And I think Thomas perhaps a bit cheekily is saying that, you know, product illustrations and all of that kind of stuff aren't really worth all the kind of reams of paper that you get through the letterbox. I
had a mathematician I was dealing with recently, and he said, why would you get real and nominal projections on the same piece of paper? And I said, it's just designed to confuse you, don't worry about it. And he laughed, but it was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. Ridiculous. Mike's laughing because I'm policing, trying to make the comments PC, but maybe I'm in the wrong job for that.
maybe the wrong person on with you. Yeah.
And so, what would that look like in terms of? I think people would kind of, you know, have no argument on that front. But what does that look like? Because you do start to see some nice formats emerging, whether that's like you know, the kind of mind maps that you draw on the wall that are people's financial plan, or it's the kind of little video snippet embedded in an email which is a catch up instead of a formal review. Is it that kind of format that you're after, or is it kind of a different way of talking to clients, do you think?
I think you know, it was interesting. We had a bit of a heated debate, as Mrs. Merton would say, with compliance recently over vulnerable consumers. Mm-hmm. And I said, you know, I'd rather we started from the point of what is going to be the most successful way to communicate with individuals that have come to see us or we've approached. And from that, it naturally flows to who's vulnerable. As you ask the questions as to how you like communication. Do you like pictures over numbers? Mm-hmm. Do you want someone to be with you? Do you want to come on your own? All those kind of things give you those tips as to, oh, why do you want someone to come with you? So it's a far nicer way to actually get that information from people in a non-confrontational way, but in a far safer way as well, because you generally end up with more information. And, you know, I had someone in compliance say to me one day, oh, that person must be vulnerable because they're a woman and they're divorced. Yeah. And I said to the compliance person, I'll tell you what, here's our phone number, why don't you phone her up and ask her? Yeah. So he didn't have the courage to do that, which is very sensible on his part. But the point is that we have to get the comms at a level where we can actually do reports in short format. We can allow, and the only way to do this is actually to do electronic reports. I think. You've then got to be careful that any links you put in last the test of time.
Sure.
Sometimes people forget about that and then store it in a different folder and it all breaks up. So technically, there are ways to do it, and it can be done. But that then gives you a problem with the people who aren't electronically minded, don't use screens and everything else. I mean, I've bought tablets for clients because I just get so fed up with them trying to get onto the portals. So I just gave them a tablet. I bought one of my clients a printer with a scanner because he's scunnered me with the way he used to photograph stuff with his phone.
Yeah.
I said, present, I'll even set it up for you. And I think we've got to just think outside the box a little bit and make it easier for people to engage and actually understand. And that's where I say you need the representation, because you need to be able to get into the regulator and actually talk to them about it.
Yeah.
You know, you need to actually say, well, I know you want to cover these various bases, and I understand it. I agree with you. But the danger is there's so much information here that will get switched off rather than switch on.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see if we can work with you to actually get something that gets the bulk of those things covered. You wouldn't necessarily always get perfection.
Yeah.
But you need better executive summaries that start reports and things like that. They get people to think, actually, oh, well, look at page 6.
Yeah.
You know, whereas if you do it in a more boring way, I don't think, you actually help people. And I think our objective as a professional body was always to help people, was to help the members first. And the best way we could help the members first was doing things that would also help the public. And the two things work in synergy really well.
Yeah.
So
because where we are now, I mean, Nick talks about, annual rebalancing kind of illustrations and things, and kind of calling them EPDs, or essentially pointless documents, which is probably a good summation, but it's probably not what the regulator is after in terms of, I think what the regulator wants is kind of clear disclosure, but that's kind of been lost in kind of lots of disclosure, which isn't necessarily the same thing, is it?
If I can say, apologies because I'm an old geezer, but years ago when SIP was there, the original key regulator that FINBRA and other things sat around, the late Tim Miller, who had worked at M&G before that, some people on this will know him. Tim was a good guy, and unfortunately he died far too young, but he came up with an idea once, which he showed me, which was key features using diagrams. And I said, I think it's fabulous, but it'll never fly, because there was too many actuaries in the deal.
Yeah.
And, they don't have that kind of ability to take something like that and either animate it or create a drawing that people actually see what's going on. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. I actually think, and this is not a joke, I actually think those that can't sketch, it would be a great thing to learn how to do simple sketches, because I find when you're in front of a client, just doing a doodle in front of them, they understand it straight away.
Yeah.
Whereas you could hit them with 2 pages of text, which is entirely compliant, but they wouldn't understand it because it's not visual enough to them.
Yeah.
And that's highly important. So yeah, that would be my dream if things went down that road. I'd be really, really happy.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, I'm going to sort of start to draw it to a close now. That's been really interesting. Thank you. And so, I mean, we started this conversation kind of with the PFS and what's happened and what people could do maybe to sort of take it forward. So is there anything that people who kind of are watching this can do, or anything that you want them to take away from this discussion in particular in terms of representation and the profession going forward, I guess? Yeah,
what I'd be looking for and what we'll be trying to put together, and Alistair started this with one of the sites we had running before the AGM, was collecting people who were prepared to volunteer. And I'm not asking people to do piles of work. What I'm asking them to do is to help, even just distribute message almost in a grapevine type approach. So that's really important. But I think what's going to be crucial here is we are going to have some kind of independent review of what's happened with PFS. And its members deserve that, the board deserves that, the past presidents deserve it. And we definitely need a proper x-ray on how the numbers have moved around, because it's too hard to see exactly what's going on. And we haven't had a satisfactory explanation. We
I
also,
think we would do that.
well,
You decided.
I think we have to ask for that with as many people asking as possible. I mean, if you look at the AGM numbers, I'm not sure of the robustness of those numbers or otherwise, but all I would say is that if that was a PLC getting those numbers at an AGM, somebody's head would have rolled, because it's not a good. If you've got a third of the people who are voting telling you that your accounts suck, then I think you need to do something. And consultation's great, but you can't consult people unless you give them all the facts first. So it's cart before the horse. So going out to consultation, out to have chats, and really what they should be doing is having a proper independent review, financials, structural, and also with a robust legal opinion on, is it even possible to fold the PFS in? Now, we did initial legal discussions, and they can't see how easy that would be because of the constitution of PFS, because it's limited by guarantee. I could be wrong on that. There may be some genius in law who knows a way around it. But I think what we need to see is an honest presentation of what's going forward. What went forward to the PFS board about bringing PFS into the CII was sketchy at best, and there wasn't enough information. There wasn't even a set of pros and cons put together, and you would expect that in that kind of document. You would expect it. I mean, whether we agree some kind of connection, whether we go it alone, I think as far as a professional body in our sector is concerned, this is the time to strengthen the professional body. It's certainly not the time to emasculate it. And I think it is being emasculated at the moment, and that has to stop, and we have to have a proper adult conversation to take things forward. And that's what I'll be pushing for, along with the team who've worked very hard on actually putting things together, considering various legal documents, all the various meetings we've had, and I really appreciate what they've done. And I think having those different people, and it's almost like you would think we'd segmented that group to be diverse by intention, but it's really been by skills, and we've ended up with, I think, a good people to work with, and we've got a good resource in the rest of the past presidents and the PFS board. So now's the time for us to actually sit down and build the long-term plan and see where that long-term plan can be best executed.
Okay. Well, I think that's a call to action if ever I heard one. So thanks ever so much. Thanks so much, Rob, for your time. It's always lovely chatting to you. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today on this hot sunny day. I'm going to go off and melt now. But just before I go, I'm going to let you know that next week, Mark is back in the hosting chair, and he's going to be joined by Ray Tubman, who is the chief exec of Finicomp, part of Bravura now. So if you want chat around financial services, software, tech, the Australian view on things, that's a good one to tune into. So hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much for joining us. And thank you, Rob, as well. Bye for now.
Thanks to everybody that came in. Thank you very much. Thanks, Nat. See you later. Bye.